Tech Robots, headed by my dear friend, Mr. Ibrahim, founder and CEO of FinTech Robots, his team in Bahrain, for cultivating an environment to promote in-depth discussions on the importance of pensions towards social stability, sustainability, and peace. I guess you are all aware, longer life expectancy, extended contribution in the labor market, and reduction in family sizes are increasingly adding pressure on pension payouts. And that's global, of course. This undoubtedly exacerbates generational tensions over limited public resources. With no resources to support themselves over time, this will subsequently lead to a social crisis, or to social crises, in fact. Over time, this will subsequently lead to social crises and jeopardize social stability and threaten peace in the long run. We also take into account the youth bulge. According to the World Bank, 2/3 of MENA's population are under the age of 35. Youth unemployment is also over 25%, and nearly half of this group, 30%, 40%, are females. This youth bulge is projected to expand. According to a UNICEF report, in the years between 2015 and 2030, the population of Iraq and Bahrain are projected to grow by almost 50%. By mid-century, 271 million children, adolescents, and youth will live in the MENA. Central to this issue are also expatriates. The MENA region has millions of expatriates with untapped potential vis-à-vis pension schemes. Approximately 70% of the workforce in the GCC is comprised of expatriates and migrant workers. Including expatriates and foreign workers in a pension strategy has significant dividends. Pensions are an incredibly powerful asset to the economy. With pensions, nations have been able to mobilize pension savings into large pools of assets through creating jobs and employment. Yet, expatriates' private savings tend to be invested outside the national economy of the host country due to the scarce offers of local savings strategies for expats, as well as negative perceptions regarding foreign workers, unfortunately. Securing pension schemes and providing this social security to millions of expatriates in the MENA region will ensure that they have guaranteed income after many years of service. This will not only impact their family life, working relations, and so on, but it will further improve the relations between both the expatriates and their host countries. Pensions should contribute to a dynamic that should bring to the attention of the international community through the multilateral system the need to find a solution to this pension. And IPI have been working with my friend Ibrahim on bringing this issue up to the multilateral system in New York and elsewhere. With prudent foresight, sound economic policies, and joint collaborations between private sectors, think tanks, and governments, the loophole of pension schemes and expatriates can be remedied. It can generate a continuous, prosperous cycle of sustainable and social peace. I will end here with a call to all participants, particularly governments, private, public sectors, and unions to take up the pension challenges to the highest multilateral levels. Given the gravity of the situation and the ramifications of the pension crisis on social peace, to work together and create a pension strategy framework based on prudent foresight, population structures, and sound economic policies to address this matter now before it becomes too late. Without further ado, I look forward to our panelists' insights on improving pensions coverage for individuals and or portions of society who are currently uncovered by national social protection systems, such as the self-employed, the millions in informal sector, the youths in new temporary employment contracts, and expat workers in the GCC countries. With that, I would like to introduce the panelists. I would start with ladies first. Ms. Stephanie Payet, Private Pension Analyst, OECD. Mr. Mohammed Sghir, CFO, AXA Green Crescent Insurance Company, PJSC, with also Mr. Will Sandbrook, Executive Director, NEST, Insight Unit at National Employment Saving Trust, NEST, UK. With your permission, I will start off with the questions for either Mohammed or Stephanie. How can we turn the COVID-19 crisis into an opportunity for regional pension reforms? Stephanie, you might start.
Yes, sure. Thank you very much for the introduction and for the invitation. And I'm very glad to be here and to speak at this conference. So at the OECD, we have done some work on non-standard forms of work, which is a very diverse population, as you already mentioned. It includes part-time, temporary employees, the self-employed, and all the informal workers, as you were mentioning. And we have also done work on the impact of the COVID-19 crisis on retirement savings in particular. And one thing that we can mention is that the COVID-19 crisis has actually hit those non-standard workers much harder than any other workers, like the full-time permanent employees, because they were highly exposed to job and income losses following the lockdowns, but they are also usually less likely to benefit from income support in case of a job or income loss, in case also of sickness, because the sickness coverage is not the same for the self-employed, for example, in many countries, or also in case of mandatory quarantine. So all of this may have affected their capacity to save for retirement. And if anything, the COVID-19 crisis may be a wake-up call for governments to look at these populations and to tackle their specific needs. Another thing that we see from the COVID-19 crisis is that it has highlighted the lack of precautionary savings for large parts of the population. And to address this, some countries have allowed people who had savings in their retirement savings arrangements to access those savings, to withdraw those savings, and in order to face a fall in income. But this is at the detriment of future retirement income. So one of the key OECD messages is that in some emergency individual cases, yes, it is necessary to allow people to access their savings, but this should not be for anybody in any circumstances. It should be individual specific needs related to their income loss, for example. And some countries have these provisions in place, while some countries lack those provisions. And maybe will talk about it later, but there are new developments in terms of having hybrid savings products where people can mix short-term and long-term objectives, and these hybrid savings could be developed. And maybe a third development related to the COVID-19 crisis is the fact that it has accelerated the development of mobile and remote services. So new technologies can make retirement savings arrangements more accessible for more people, and also easier to adjust to the need of those workers. Thank you.
See, if you have something to add at that level, please do.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. So thank you, Najib, for the question, and thank you, Stephanie, actually, for your answer, because I would be pretty much in line with what you said. I would just stress again on one thing that you mentioned, which is the mobility of the people. And I think that now people have realized that working remotely, or the fact that many actually of the, especially GCC countries, have handled well the COVID-19 crisis, it's going to fix a bit more the expats in this region, but it's going as well to create a more worrying future for them in terms of retirement savings gap. So this is clearly something where the COVID-19 has actually accelerated the thoughts for many individuals. So which time am I going to retire? Will I have enough savings by the age of retirement to live on that? And I think that this mobility question actually has been even increased by the COVID-19, where we have been estranged from each other for a long time, but actually people realize they can cope with a remote life. And once again, they found security, reactivity, especially in the GCC countries, that not many other countries in the world have been able to do. So all in all, I think this COVID-19 pandemic has accelerated the thoughts around that for the individuals. But at the level of corporate companies, they exactly had the same impression as well. So when you are in a situation of weakness, you try to think about the mental health for your employees. And actually, many companies realize that the financial wellness was very often something which was missed by them. Very often we speak about the physical health or the medical health, as we can call it. But clearly the financial wellness, which is a very important part of the mental health, was always looked down. And now clearly the companies are looking more and more on that. Lastly, there is the impact on the governments as well. You had a number of people stuck in different countries with different financial pressure because the economy slowed down. There was uncertainty around the economic transactions and so on. So all of that as well forced the governments to think in different dimensions, but including the retirement dimensions. What is the future going to be, especially for the expats in many of these countries? And are the retirement savings enough, and can they be used or utilized better to optimize the economy?
Thank you, Mohammed. I think I'll get back to Stephanie and try to find out her thoughts about the fact that across the Arab world, there is a substantial informal work sector with the self-employed, and there are residents/migrants. What is the world's best practice to deal with the non-homogeneous segments of society? Second part of the question, How can we provide social protection to all people who need it, whenever they need it, in a financially responsible way?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think one of the first part of your question is about the fact that this is a non-homogeneous society. And indeed, given that a one-size-fits-all approach is probably not the best way to deal with this population, because on one side, we think about the self-employed, for example, but you have self-employed with very large and regular income, such as doctors, lawyers, and then you have also self-employed that are selling food in the streets. They are also self-employed, but definitely they are not in the same situation as the first group. So it is important to understand that there are these differences across this group. This is not an homogeneous group, as you were saying. And what can we do? Well, it depends on what is the starting point in your country. There are countries that have built their retirement saving system around occupational pension plans, meaning the role of the employer is centerpiece, and everything needs to go through the employer. The contributions go through the employer. So in that case, you are missing all the self-employed, and you are also missing all the informal workers. And even within the group of employees, you may have employees who are out of the occupational pension system because they are working part-time, or they are temporary employees, and they are not eligible to be covered by occupational pension plans. So in that case, what you probably need are more dedicated retirement savings arrangements for the other groups that are not covered. But when your system is already built around personal pension plans, so it's not the responsibility of the employer to enroll the worker and to collect the contributions, but it's more a direct relationship between the pension provider and the individuals, then it's much easier to have a more universal type of pension system that works for all, because then you just need to have income and to contribute into that personal pension plan. So, but what to do when you have already something built around occupational pension system, which is a lot of the OECD countries actually. Then there are some who try to develop dedicated retirement savings products, for example, for the self-employed. So in France and Belgium, for example, you have dedicated voluntary personal pensions for the self-employed. So only a self-employed can open this type of plan, and they have dedicated financial incentives to contribute to those plans. In some countries, even these plans that are dedicated for self-employed workers, they can cover the spouse of the self-employed, like in Japan. And in a lot of cases also, it is the expectation of self-employed that they will use their business assets to finance their future retirement. So some countries are using this in order to allow the self-employed to earmark part of their business profit or the sale proceeds for retirement through specific retirement savings arrangements. And you find this type of arrangements in Australia, in Denmark, and in the Netherlands. And yet another way to bring the self-employed into pension saving is to allow them to group. And for example, there are profession-wide associations of self-employed in different countries that can establish on a voluntary basis an occupational pension plan for all their members. So the self-employed have a dedicated program, but it's a group with other self-employed. And in the same idea, in the United States, since 2021, so since January of this year, small employers and the self-employed can join multiple employer plans, so they can reduce the cost of having an occupational pension plan because they are all together. And also, it's also new from 2019 in the United States, the self-employed can enroll through chambers of commerce. And chambers of commerce can have an important role for the self-employed because they could also be a vehicle to have automatic enrollment, for example, into occupational or personal pension plans. And maybe will talk more about this this automatic enrollment policy in the UK that has been quite successful. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. This is very, very interesting and informative. I will address Will. Dear friend, do you think that increasing retirement saving among independent workers has been a big challenge, if not impossible? What are you doing to address that in the UK, or what is the UK approach in that regard? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you to Ibrahim and FinTech Robos for having me on the panel, and thanks for the question. So, I mean, hopefully, what I'll say will build a bit on particularly some of Stephanie's comments. I guess, the first thing to say is, while we talk about homogeneity of different worker groups, I think, to me, really, if you're addressing retirement savings coverage, the biggest thing that really matters is who pays you, right? So if there is someone acting like an employer or a gig platform or anyone who is in control of the income stream that an individual has in terms of paying them, then there's a relatively well tried and trodden kind of history and literature around how you can get those people to save for retirement. And Stephanie mentioned automatic enrollment. So in the UK, employers are legally required to automatically enroll their workers into a pension plan, and we haven't chosen to draw the coverage of that across all traditional workers, but we could have done. And I think that becomes a question for individual countries as to where they want to draw the lines in terms of where a mandate like that might work. But that can cover anybody where there's someone acting in the role of an employer. So some form of payroll system that automatic model can work and has been proven to work really well. I think what's much more complicated is people whose income doesn't come through a third party like that. So people who are paid directly, through invoicing, people who are paid in cash directly, kind of in the self-employed informal sectors. And there is a much bigger problem, and one that we definitely haven't been able to resolve in the UK. I think we're very clear on the thing that doesn't work. So Stephanie talked a lot about kind of product innovation and different types of products, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a moment because I really agree with that. But just addressing the supply of products and hoping that people, through information and guidance and advice, will voluntarily start saving reasonable portions of their income for their retirement, historically hasn't certainly in the UK and a number of other countries hasn't been proven to work well. So there has to be something more than simply making the right products available. And I guess there are sort of three areas that we've been looking at and thinking about in my organisation and in the UK. So one is about technology, and how do we use technology to make saving more automatic? So that might be integrating savings deductions into things like invoicing software or point of sale payments platforms like iZettle, card reader type technologies. So if you can do things to sort of mimic payroll deduction in the way that self-employed and small business owners receive their income, then that's one area we think might be worth looking at. And also, as part of that, trying to integrate non-standard forms of contribution. So finding the ways that it's possible to get people kind of saving little bits of their income. So things like save as you spend programs like Master Retirement in Mexico, or micro investment apps that round up small amounts of expenditure to the nearest round number and take the difference and invest it. We think there's a lot of mileage in some of those ideas. So then the second thing is around product design. And in particular, and again, Stephanie kind of intimated about this earlier, we have a view that traditional pensions, when understood as somewhere you invest your money and can't then access it again until some predefined age close to retirement, may not fit the psychology of the self-employed very well. The self-employed tend to have volatile incomes. They tend to have a certain kind of entrepreneurial set of attitudes. And so I think kind of products that combine some element of long-term invested saving, as it were, but also shorter term accessible and more liquid saving are likely to fit the psychology of the self-employed better. And then I think the third thing is, thinking about the tax systems and both tax reporting and tax collection systems. That's a point where kind of almost everyone, apart from completely informal off-book workers, kind of interact with the system at some point, usually have to pay some money somehow into the system. And so looking at the opportunities to integrate some form of savings or investment pathway into how people report and pay their tax obligations is sort of something that I think is worthy of consideration. So those are the ideas we're exploring. I don't think any of them is proven yet. And so far we have a lot of evidence about how it's difficult to get independent workers to save for retirement, and not a lot of evidence about how it's possible to fix that problem. But those are some of the ideas that we think are worthy of exploration.
Thank you, Will. It's very interesting, very helpful to compare notes between different countries, especially in this part of the world, in the MENA region, where we have the pension funds as one of the biggest challenges. I will get back to Mohammed and then Stephanie. In countries with substantial informal sector, coverage gap creates problems, of course. More than a third of households end up at retirement with only social assistance that could be modest. How can a new tire be built and made universal? Thank you.
Yeah, it's a very good question, and clearly it will be one of the hottest challenges in the future for these countries, because as you hinted to, there is a social pressure as well in these countries, especially those in the MENA region which have a big informal system. So clearly there will need to be some kind of retail proposition, and we know that one of the issues which was mentioned before actually is the lack of product, of good savings product or pension product for the population, who at least, even if they are informal, could have access to their own kind of individual savings plans, which are not today, don't exist, or are not very relevant to the local populations. So I'm a big believer in the fact that there should be something which is a bit universal, given by the state as a social security, but we know it will be minimum, and it's going to be even not enough, especially in the future. But then to let the access for those who may have informal income to have the access to products which will allow them as well to save for decent retirement, and that's clearly something which is important, because at the same time, many countries, especially North Africa, have a kind of sophisticated tax regime under which, of course, the informal employees don't contribute to. So it's also replicating in the fact that the benefits they will get from it is clearly not in adequation with what they would hope. But on the other side as well, it's all a debate around defined benefits and defined contribution. We know the universal systems tend to provide for defined benefits. And clearly, there will be an evolution for defined contribution, which for this segment of the population, which is informal, can be at least a kind of solution for them to access to a decent retirement saving.
You could bring in your answer to that, bearing in mind in 3 minutes we'll have a poll question.
So maybe if I can complement Mohammed's answer. Well, I fully agree with what you just said. Necessarily, especially the need for a safety net provided by the state that covers minimum needs. But as the name says, it's just a safety net and it just covers minimum needs. So these informal worker groups, they need more dedicated, specific retirement savings products. And there are some examples across OECD and non-OECD countries. For example, in Colombia, they have a program called BEPS, and this is targeted at the lowest income groups because the recognition of the fact that informal workers are usually low-income earners. And so this program is a voluntary program. It's targeted to low-income people, and there is a financial incentive because the state gives a 20% matching contribution at the time of retirement if the worker chooses an annuity, so has longevity risk protection at retirement. Other examples that were mentioned as well are the micro pensions in many African and Asian countries. So the idea is to have a typical defined contribution product that allows for small and frequent contributions to allow for those people who have infrequent earnings to contribute what they can whenever they can. So for example, in Nigeria, they have a micro pensions where you can contribute daily, weekly, monthly, or even once in a year as is convenient for the worker. And everything is done through electronic payments or even cash deposits in some places that are easily accessible for people. And but there is also the idea of the behavioral biases that we all have, that sometimes it's good to have like set and forget. So following this idea, in India, they have a special program for unorganized workers. And there it's the contributions are set. So depending on the age when you join the program, you will have a certain amount of contribution. So the earlier you join, the lower is your contribution. And at the end, everybody will get a certain annuity throughout retirement. So this is one way to target the informal workers. But it's also important to make savings very easy for them. So we already mentioned the fact that contributions can be flexible. But in Mexico, for example, what they have done is that they have the regulator, the supervisor of pensions, has made a lot of partnerships with business entities. And workers can deposit their contributions in more than 16,000 convenience stores around the country, like 7-Eleven or pharmacies. So it's really to make easy for people, even in remote rural areas, to make contributions for their retirement savings. And as already mentioned by Will, there is also this idea of saving through consumption, because these informal workers, they don't have regular employment relationship, but what they do is that they consume. So there are new applications that are in development, allowing people to commit to save whenever they make payments with their credit card, for example. And those applications, the contributions can come directly from the worker. So, for example, you go and buy a coffee, it's €1.90, so the 10 cents automatically are rounded and go to your retirement savings account. So this is your own contribution. But there are also partnerships with big brands and in a discount and loyalty programs. So every time you go and buy something in a specific shop, then this shop will provide a contribution of 20%, for example, of what you have bought in their shop to your retirement savings account. So there are really new things that are developed to really try to address the specific needs of the informal workers.
Merci. Thank you, Stephanie. I think I mentioned the poll question. I don't know if you have to read it, but should social insurance and pension arrangements cover every single one who lives in the country, or just its local citizens? You know my answer to that question, but I need your answers. Plus, I think I have two questions from the audience. First question is, how aware and educated Arab citizens in terms of retirement planning? Are there efforts to enhance their financial awareness? How effective can such initiatives be to solve the current issues? Second question, I think you all read it. Question says, who can launch group schemes for self-employed? Or in another word, who can offer it, and it should be structured? So I will leave it to you to answer these questions later. I will now get back to Will, if you don't mind, and ask you, how does the rest of the world build their pension framework or infrastructure so that all of these segments are covered adequately? Tell us about measures to increase coverage in the UK, and how will they be, how well have they worked? Thank you.
So the primary measure in the UK to increase retirement savings coverage was that since 2012, all UK employers employing at least one person are legally mandated to automatically enroll their eligible workers into a DC plan, which means that the employer does the enrolling and starts deducting contributions automatically from pay unless the individual makes an active choice to opt out of that plan and therefore to stop saving. So it flips the default. Going back to what Stephanie was saying about behavioural biases, it flips the default from not saving and having to make an active choice to save to instead being a default of saving and having to make an active choice to stop. And in terms of how successful that's been, so if you look at eligible workers, so the workers who are eligible for that mandate, participation in retirement saving in the UK amongst that group's gone from just under half in 2011 to about 90% now in 2021. So by kind of almost any measure, that's been hugely successful, and amongst the sort of traditionally employed workforce has created kind of near universality in terms of retirement saving. And going back to a point I was trying to make earlier, the UK government chose the parameters for who was included in that and who wasn't. So, for example, at the moment, gig platforms like Uber are not covered in that obligation. So Uber is not required to automatically enrol drivers into a pension, but that's substantively a design choice. So it would be possible, or I would argue it'd be possible to cover lots of other types of organisation in that mandate other than traditional employers, if so desired. And it's also possible to decide on how to draw the parameters around individual eligibility. So at the moment, you're eligible to be auto-enrolled if you're earning at least £10,000 a year, but that's a choice. It would be possible to auto-enroll kind of everybody, including part-time workers, if that was desirable. And so that becomes a kind of local choice structure, depending on other parameters in the system, like the value of Pillar 1 and who that captures. But kind of fundamentally, I think that automatic enrolment mechanism, kind of soft compulsion, as some people call it, is a hugely effective way of driving up participation. But as I said earlier, what it doesn't cover is people where there's no third party or institution, no employer, no platform between the customer and the worker. So people are being paid directly. Then it's much harder for a mechanism like that to work. And in the UK, I said 90% of eligible workers are saving for retirement. Only about 14% of the self-employed are saving for retirement, and that's self-employment is about one in seven of UK workers. So that's a significant challenge. And just a kind of final comment to bridge to one of the questions that was asked in the audience. In terms of education, financial education and capability, I mean, I think I'm not familiar with what has or hasn't happened in the kind of MENA region, but kind of all the evidence I've ever seen is that interventions around increasing people's financial literacy, they have benefits, but they tend not to actually result in large-scale behavioural change. So interventions to educate people into saving more for their retirement are kind of unlikely to work. I think there needs to be a harder, kind of stronger intervention to make that work.
Two questions. I will seek the intervention of Stephanie or Muhammad if they want to add some parts of the answer to both questions.
Well, maybe there is one question related to who can launch group schemes for the self-employed. So I mentioned this possibility in some countries, and basically there are two. Well, it's two different ways of doing that. It can either come from the association of self-employed workers itself. So, for example, there are some countries that have association for a given sector, like construction workers, for example. In the Netherlands, they have a special pension scheme just for the self-employed in the construction sector. So it's an association that made all the effort to set up the pension plan for their members. And the other approach is a pension provider who offers the same pension plan to multiple employers, including the self-employed. So that this is the approach that the United States is taking, where unrelated employers and self-employed workers can join the same provider and have access to a saving plan.
So if I may go back on the Najib, I think you are on mute, Najib.
Mohammed,
Yes.
as I said earlier, I think I'll seek your answer to these two questions, if you have any answers. A question I have in mind for you. The question is, more than 50% of workforce in the Gulf Cooperation countries, the GCC, are expat workers. How do you look at this, both in terms of being a social risk, but also an opportunity at the same time? Thank you, Mohammed.
Yeah, thank you. It's a good question, and it's becoming, I think, aware. It's a very important one. What we saw in the past, that's 10 years ago, most of expats coming to the UAE were planning to stay for less than 3 years. Now, the expectation actually for 2/3 of them is to stay for at least 5 years, and for many of them is even over 10 years. So as long as people were fine to sit on their retirement saving for a couple of years, now this is a big chunk of their career actually that they are going to spend outside their home retirement system, and this is creating clearly an important saving gap for them. It has a social risk, of course. We spoke before about financial wellness, and the expats. The goal of the expats when they come is not to live being broke or not having enough to live a decent retirement life in their home country. And you can see that some countries have even moved forward to propose retirement visas in the GCC. The UAE has announced only 2 weeks ago that there was a new retirement visa, meaning that actually these people who now call these countries their home are welcome to stay. And there are, of course, many benefits for the countries as well to have this population fixed in the country. One of them, which is very clear, it's to spend the retirement money as well in the country, so that the economy of the country is actually benefiting not only from their work, but as well from the expenses they are going to incur in their retirement life. So it's clearly an opportunity in terms of pure economical sense. What happened traditionally is that expats used to remit money back home, but when this money is being remitted to another country, it does not benefit the local economy. And I think it's clearly something that the authority have clearly understood. And that's also why they see a win-win situation for allowing expats to find local solutions for saving for the retirement and to spend the retirement in their home country. Other than that, as well, from the pure expat view, many expats come from countries where the economy is not as robust as the GCC ones. Most of the GCC currencies except Kuwait, are pegged to the dollars. And the dollar is a very strong currency. I think we can all concur on that. And for them, having or taking the risk to save for the retirement in their home currency is actually a big financial risk, because there are fluctuations in many of these countries. There's a huge volatility. There is also a huge inflation taking place in these countries, whereas most of the GCC countries have an inflation which is very well controlled. And once again, with a strong currency. So there is a social risk, clearly, but I think that the authorities and the expats, as well in the actual situation, have understood that there is a clear opportunity which can benefit on a win-win basis to everybody.
Thank you, Mohammed. I will move to the final question addressed to three of you, my friends. The question is, what should be done in terms of system design, legislation, and products so that our children and the children of our children, 2 generations from now, can retire in a secure, comfortable way? This is a very, very tough question. Good luck, my friends. Shall I start with Will?
Sure. So, yeah, it's a great question. So, look, I mean, I think I want to reiterate what's already been said. Kind of, the answer to this question depends on kind of local idiosyncrasies in the system, right? Depends on the design of the first pillar, sort of social protection layer, which in some countries around the world is still heavily income related. You know, still pretty generous. But kind of fundamentally, there's sort of 3 things I would point to. So the first thing is to say that if the policy objective is universal or near universal participation in private saving for retirement, then purely voluntary systems are very unlikely to work. That would be my view. I think the evidence suggests that really whatever you do around simplifying products, making them suitable, offering advice, guidance, information, purely simply expecting people to realize they should be saving for their retirement is never going to get you close to universal coverage. And so some kind of legislative strong nudge or compulsion framework is kind of very likely to be required. I mean, Stephanie, I'll defer to Stephanie, but I think it's fair to say that most of the systems around the world that have achieved close to universal coverage have employed some kind of very strong nudge or compulsion in order to get there. I think the second thing, and this has been alluded to a little bit in the discussion, but maybe not enough, is that this can't be all about retirement saving at the expense of broader financial well-being, especially where we're talking about lower income bits of the population, right? So there's a tendency, I think, sometimes for people in the pensions world to fixate on, are people saving for their retirement? Are they saving enough for their retirement? I think we have to step back and think about all the other financial objectives that people may have that still contribute to their well-being in retirement. Things like home ownership, things like emergency saving that help avoid indebtedness. So these are all kind of objectives that compete for people's scarce resources. I think someone asked, in fact, there's a question from the audience about, should employer-sponsored pension schemes really be employer-sponsored financial well-being schemes? I mean, yes, in my view, they absolutely should, and that should allow for some people some of the time maybe not to be saving for their retirement because it may simply not be the right thing for them to be doing with their money at that point. And then I think the third thing is, and I touched on this earlier, I think technology and product design are really crucial, and they help draw together some of the things I was just saying in my second point there. I think hybrid products that help people efficiently manage their money, help them to distribute their money across different financial goals. I think there's a big role for data, machine learning, artificial intelligence in helping people take the small amounts of money they're able to save through some of the mechanisms Stephanie was talking about, roundups, save as you consume type models, take those small amounts of money and allocate them efficiently across goals like retirement and short-term saving. So I think in summary, some kind of strong policy nudge from government, that recognises that it's not all about retirement, and that coexists with a product environment that utilizes technology, utilizes data, and utilizes well-designed products to make sure people are saving in the right ways. That feels like the kind of 21st century DC system that we should be headed for. Different countries have different distances to travel in terms of how close they are to being there now.
Thank you, Will. Maybe Mohammed can add his part of the answer.
Yeah, thank you. And like Will as well, I would advocate for clearly defined contribution systems, clearly. As we see now, and actually what is good in the Arab world is that we have been late compared to many Western countries. So we've always, we've seen basically some of the mistakes as well, which were done by sometimes pure populism or political kind of design in other countries. And I think that's one of the things that we need to understand, because your question is about children and grandchildren, and to make sure that this system is sustainable. This should not be a system which is supported by debt, as we can see in many Western European countries. So it should not be for the governments to buy basically the social piece, and for them to basically endebt even more the country to pay for retirees. That's really something which is very important. The other thing for me is the mobility, because people are even going to get even more mobile in the future, clearly, moving from one country to the other. And for people who have been a bit all over the place, like myself, there will be a big question at the end, is how are you going to reconstitute your whole career in one spot? And this is something which can only be supported by, I would say, kind of innovative regulation or supportive regulation. And for that, we need as well the countries and the regulation to be a bit more advanced. Today, regulations are very diverse and don't necessarily push in the same direction. But I think that if we want to give a good legacy on retirement systems, clearly one of the things that we need to work, and I advocate myself as an insurance professional, we need to lobby as well to have a regulation which makes much more sense from a pure international standpoint. Today, clearly, moving pension around is not something easy. It is kind of within Europe, for instance, but for countries in the MENA region, it's clearly a big challenge. The other thing then is layering your saving goals, basically. You can have a pillar 1, pillar 2, which is more supported by your company, but it's also to make sure that there is a value creation which is being made for the people. And I think it's something which is very important to have this kind of view, is that people will be the drivers for their own retirement in the future. I think we should rely less and less on pure governments to actually support us. The governments will be here to give us the right framework, the right regulation, and so on. But that will be clearly for people as well to be aware, to realize the gap they may have as well. And I know that many people around me, they can be literate, they can be highly educated, and so on, but they don't have the financial literacy to realize that the life expectancy is going up quite significantly, meaning that they're retired, or the retirement period they will have is actually going to be very high, and much higher than what we can think, that inflation is going to impact us as well. So clearly, the proactivity as well from the people is going to be very important. And as your question, and that would be my last word on that, your question was referring to children and grandchildren. I think there's clearly something on education. There's no age to start to save for retirement. I think that many people, when they hit the 40, 45 mark, start to think about retirement. I think there should be something on pure educational basis, making sure that even from the children, the students, and the young professional, they have at least the awareness and at least that we make them aware that there will be an incentive for them to save for the old days.
Thank you so much, Mohammed. I'll ask Stephanie to add a few comments on that. Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you. So indeed, a very challenging question and challenging to go after Will and Mohammed. I agree with some of the comments that have been made earlier. So one of the things that we believe is important at the OECD is that each country tries to have a diversified pension system. So basically the idea of not putting all your eggs in the same basket. So having a mix between well, the safety net is given. You really need a public finance safety net for everybody. But then on top of this, you need probably a pay-as-you-go pension system where people contribute for their future pension through the state. So it's not debt finance. Hopefully, it's something that is based on the contribution of workers, and you have new designs of systems such as notional defined contribution system, which are pay-as-you-go, but the payments are adjusted based on increases in life expectancy, for example, or the state of the economy. And you need to complement that as well with private funded systems. And there I agree with Will that if we just rely on people to realize that whatever the state will provide them is not enough, we may just have a lot of people not acting and failing to have enough when they reach retirement. So taking into account behavioral biases that we all have, mandatory pension, automatic enrollment, take into account this fact that we don't want to think about the future. It's too far away, so we want to enjoy our money now and not save for tomorrow. So that's why mandatory or quasi-mandatory systems are important. And also it's important to, again, taking into account the behavioral biases of people. If you make some segments of your pension system voluntary, then by all means you need to try to nudge people as much as possible into pension saving. You can use reminders. There are some again, with the use of new technology, all these things become easier to implement, and you can have in your phone a mobile application saying, "Hey, you haven't saved for this while. Why don't you save now for your future self?" And there are even applications, because there was a question in the chat caused by the audience about how do we change the mindset, because people save in banks but they don't save for retirement. But there are apps, for example, that show yourself in 20, 30 years from now, and basically you create a link between yourself now and your future self, and this can increase how much you will save for your retirement. So using the behavioral insights to increase savings, but having a diversified system with different sources to finance future retirement.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. This is quite informative. I don't see other questions. I'd like to seek also your thoughts on something that is preoccupying us as myself and my colleagues at the International Peace Institute, which is a preventive diplomacy think tank. And we consider, among other challenges around the world, that the pension crisis, as I mentioned in my introductory remarks, the crises are threatening the social peace at the long term. And you are aware that more than anybody else of how increasing at high speed is the retiree population around the world. So if we don't find a solution to that, and I think fixing the pension system is the main way, we will have serious threats to social peace, not only at the national level, but at the region and international levels. My idea that I discussed with my friend Ibrahim and his team is, how can we, through you, I think Mohammed has covered the Arab world, will Europe and UK, Stephanie from her position, how can we work together with all our partners to raise this issue at the multilateral level as a serious threat to stability, to sustainable development? And I think many officials, many government officials are aware of that, but we fall short from raising this issue as a major concern worldwide. I leave it to you who wants to start and who wants to add some comments to that.
Maybe I could start. So, well, you know that the OECD is a multilateral international organization. So the whole point of the OECD is to bring countries around the same table and to talk about different issues that relate to the economy. So in terms of pensions, one of the things that we have observed is the lack of trust of the population towards their pension system. There are many, especially among the younger generations, there are many that believe that the state pension will not be for them, that they will be left with their own means to provide for themselves during retirement. So one of the angles that we are working on at the OECD, so we have a group of pension regulators and supervisors representing all the OECD countries. And one of the angles of work that we have with them is about governance. So making sure that people can trust that the pension money will be invested in their best interests. So not robbing people, because there are a lot of concerns in the pension industry about the fact that fees and costs that are charged to the members are high, and sometimes people fail to understand what it is used for. And more importantly, they fail to understand that all these fees and charges eventually reduce how much they will get in retirement. So they fail to change provider when the provider they are with is charging too much. So for us, it's important also to work with regulators to make sure that the legislative provisions have all the safeguards in place so that the pension money of the people are invested and are taken care of in the best interest, always with the best interest of the people in mind.
So I have a couple of thoughts, if that's helpful. So I mean, it's definitely hugely eloquent on that topic. I guess I just two observations. One optimistic, one perhaps more pessimistic. So I'll do the pessimistic one first, which is I think we have to recognise that many countries have a pensions crisis, but the crisis is often quite different as between different countries, and in particular, it's a drastic oversimplification, but in particular, on the one hand, you have countries who have historically generous pay-as-you-go systems who are facing a fiscal crisis of affordability, who are trying to retrench away from those generous systems and put more of an onus on private saving. And then you have countries who have historically not very generous pay-as-you-go systems, which are therefore sustainable fiscally, but where where what they're facing is the sort of social unrest of increasing old age poverty, as people have their, require their private savings to stretch over longer periods. Now a lot of the solutions are the same, kind of more private saving, and as Stephanie said, really brilliantly, more private savings, but within well-diversified systems that balance pay-as-you-go elements and private elements. But I think we have to recognise that sort of multilateral cooperation on this is going to be a challenge where countries think they are solving in many cases sort of radically different problems to one another. I guess my sort of more optimistic observation would be, here in the week following COP26, there clearly is a recognition of the sort of global and multilateral role that invested assets have to play in addressing the climate crisis, addressing kind of long-term responsible investment type issues. And I think that there is, since those are issues which also affect individuals and which many individuals feel strongly about, I think using the sort of global role of invested assets and the role that invested assets have to play in addressing the climate crisis as a way of connecting people with the idea of investment, and helping people to understand that when they put money away in a pension, it's invested on their behalf. Action is taken on their behalf with those investments. I think that is something that could be a game changer in terms of helping people feel more trust in the system, provide the system more kind of license to act on their behalf, and in the end, be motivated towards them actually putting more money away in those products. And differentiating. One of the questions was, people maybe save a bit in a bank, but not for retirement. Well, investing for your retirement is a really different thing to saving in a bank. And if we can help people to understand that and use some of those kind of global trend issues around the environment and the role of their investments as a way of motivating them to engage more and think more about what they're doing with their money, I think that's maybe something which globally as an industry we could do more to talk to people about, and maybe a part of the solution. So there's my more optimistic perspective.
And I think you saw the question addressed to you from the audience. You must have answered part of that, but if you'd like to add something on that, since I have you on the floor.
Yeah, I'm not sure I have much more to add beyond what I've said over the course of my various answers, which is I think there is scope to create a new mindset, and some of what I've just talked about in terms of helping people understand that the footprint of their investments and the consequences of their investments is a part of that. But I also don't think mindsets on their own are going to change behaviours dramatically in terms of making a step change in the extent to which people save for their retirement. I think that in the end has to be substantively a job for public policy intervention and regulatory intervention. And in some respects, I think then the mindset follows. One thing we've seen in the UK is by sort of forcing people to save more for their retirement, they're now becoming more engaged after the fact with the fact that they are investors and with the consequences of those investments. And so I think the sort of sequencing here is really important. I'm not sure it goes information, mindset shift, behaviour. It might go behaviour followed by information seeking, followed by mindset shift. And the thing that triggers that behaviour is much more likely to be a regulatory intervention than a mindset one.
Yeah. Maybe the question also could be addressed or answered by Muhammad. Is in the MENA region, people are not saving at all for retirement. This is maybe a generalizing statement. Maybe doing some general savings in the bank, but not retirement savings. How can we change this and create a new mindset? Muhammad, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you. It's a strong statement. But I have to say, from where I am, sometimes I do have to concur with this kind of statements, because it's true that there is a clear lack of awareness for many reasons. First, and I think that's something that we didn't mention before, but it's very cultural as well, because in the Arabic culture, there is a lot about the solidarity. So the solidarity within the family, with the older people, with the younger people, and so on. So there has been always this kind of traditional view that one will provide for me. So when I will get older, my kids will provide for me, and so on. And I think that has led as well some people to be a bit lenient toward saving or planning for their retirement. In terms of awareness, actually, when you see it's a very specific region. What we would see in many countries is one of the biggest incentive is the tax incentive. But if you look at the GCC, there is no income tax at all. So you cannot be really incentivized on the tax aspect for making people save more for the retirement. And as we mentioned before, in the rest of the countries, there is a huge part of informal economy. So when you have informal economy, of course, getting tax relief for savings product is not something which will talk to you. So I think in awareness, it's an ecosystem which needs to be built for the citizens, for people to understand what is actually going to be their gap, what is going to be their financial shortcomings in the future. I'm always advocating a very kind of multilateral forum to discuss these kind of things. We need to have the media, the professionals, so including the insurance and the banks, but also the politics and so on, just to make sure that the issue is properly understood, and that we don't come to a situation where actually the resilience and the sustainability of the country is being threatened. And that's unfortunately what we see in many aspects. I think that the awareness will take a lot of time. There is an education. I'm always advocating for financial literacy education. I think as well that in the MENA region, people are not very well aware about investments in general. We clearly have a kind of fiber for the economy as such, but I would say the real economy. But for what is more structured in terms of investments, I think there is a gap for people to understand that. And this awareness can only be built over a number of years, and even perhaps one generation, who has to understand that there are some sacrifices to be made, or not sacrifices, it's perhaps a strong word, but there are some efforts to be made towards a better retirement saving. I can see around me in countries like in the UAE, but it's the same in the country I'm from, in Nigeria, that people don't always think about it because it's far. And I think that once again, culturally, we don't like as well to project ourselves too much. There is the time of now, which is the most important. And for what is going to happen in 15, 20 years, there is sometimes a bit of reluctance to look at it. And I think it's a whole. That's why it's a whole process of education, of informing the people. Somebody mentioned before, to have an app or something saying you didn't save enough for that, but actually giving the pulse of your retirement saving is something which could help a lot of people, to guide them and to be a kind of compass for them to know how much they will need to save to have a decent retirement.
I'm told that we are left with almost 4 minutes, and we have one last question. I'd like to seek your brief answers to that. Apart from pension schemes organized by employers, should insurances, death, sickness, medical, etc., not also be part of the scheme, and thus evolving more to more complete employee benefit scheme? So I'll start with Will, please.
So my kind of brief answer to this would be yes. I think employers are increasingly realizing that their role goes beyond paying people a salary and contributing to a pension, but also needs to address a broader set of financial well-being, financial health measures. The only thing I'd say is, to me, it's not just about insurance either. I think precautionary saving, which Stephanie touched on earlier, which is a huge unlocker to all sorts of financial resilience and health measures, is also something employers should be thinking about as part of that package. So yes, I think employers thinking more holistically in terms of financial well-being and not just about pensions is important. Unfortunately, it probably doubles down on the challenge we were talking about earlier in terms of further excluding those who are not in traditional employment, and so figuring out mechanisms to mirror that change in the independent sector is also, I think, really important.
I'll ask Stephanie if she wants to add something.
No, I basically agree with Will, and maybe adding that in many countries, actually, those types of insurance are taken care by the state. But again, as Will was mentioning, it still goes through formal employment. So if you're not in formal employment, you don't usually contribute for sickness, for death benefits, and so on. So I agree with Will that some parallel system is needed for those self-employed informal workers that fall outside the network so far.
Thank you so much, Mohammed.
Yeah, so for me, I can only agree with these statements. So this is what we built internally as well. It's a holistic employee benefits offering for clients. And I think, and to be very honest, it's part of the solution. It's not the solution, but that will be part of the solution. It just makes everybody's life a bit easier. We tend to forget as well on our side that sometimes people are just not so interested, are not so aware of all this situation. They just want to know that they are covered. They are covered for their medical expenses, for their life insurance, death benefit, invalidity, disability, and their retirement. So it's sometimes a bit of an easy solution. It's most of the time a bit downsized for them. It's undersized, but it's at least a first step in this education and knowing there is something on it. What I'm actually much more in favor of is this kind of employee-sponsored plan, but with room for the employees to contribute by themselves on a voluntary basis and to say, I'd like to top up because I'd like to have more, to put more on my medical cover or to put more on my retirement. And I think that will be the best scenario. But once again, and I second what Will and Stephanie said, that will only fix the issue for the formal employees, for the formal economy. All those who are left out from this formal economy, who are more in an informal kind of employment or gig economy, will not benefit from this kind of platforms.
I would like to have you say in few seconds, if you have a final message before we close. We're already 1 minute late, and I would like to highlight the fact that our friend Yed Hourani, who should have been with us today, but couldn't attend due to family health emergency, we wish him all the best. So I will start with Will, Mohammed, and the last word will be for a lady, for Stephanie.
I think just to reiterate what I've said already, for any of these things to work, there has to be enough money going into the system. People have to be contributing enough money into the system, and for me, getting people started with that requires a push, not just encouragement and hope. So I think that's probably my biggest message.
Mohammed?
For me, to be very short, I think that having actually this kind of event is already a first step and a win. I started my career in the Middle East now 14 years ago, 13, 14 years ago. And at that time, I was a bit speaking alone when I was speaking about the retirement issues. But I can see that now this idea actually, or this issue has created more and more buzz around. And I think that's very healthy as well to have this kind of event, these kind of discussions. We have to be very honest that this did not happen before. It did not exist. So thank you for Mr. Ibrahim as well to put all his energy in these kind of things, because that's that's by doing this, that's actually this issue is getting more attention from everybody. And I think it's very important that we keep on discussing about these issues. I'm happy to have two people from international institutes such as you, Najib, and Stephanie as well, because at least we know that it's also a topic which is clearly first high in the agenda of the authorities, but also the only way to address it is to have a multinational kind of cooperation and discussions, and that's only possible thanks to institutions like yours. So that's for me, that's all I wanted to say. So there's still a long way ahead of us, but I think that at least the start is here, and I can say that we always meet good quality people and people with good intention in this kind of events, and I think that I'm sure in a few years the discussion will be even more mature than that.
Stephanie.
Yes, thanks. So maybe final words on those non-standard forms of work, the self-employed, the informal workers, and the importance to take their specific needs and characteristics into account, and to have dedicated products because they are outside the normal system. So you need to build specific products for them, and to use behavioral insights to make sure that they also save for retirement.
Thank you. With that, I will. I think you'll agree with me. We have to, as Mohammed said, we have to thank my friend Ibrahim and his team, and for bringing us together. And we have to salute him, chapeau bas, applaud him, and his live wire team. And hopefully, as you all agree, we will, through this platform, bring up this issue to the highest level of multilateral concerns, as it is a matter of a big challenge that should be dealt with the international organizations. So hopefully with OECD, with CDUN, specialized agencies. Imagine having ILO representing the workers, having the Global Compact representing the private sector, and having the World Bank and the Bretton Woods institutions, plus other success stories that will also advise us on. We will have, as Mohammed wished, charted the path or the roadmap towards solving this very, very crucial and challenging question. I thank you so much. I learned a lot from you, and hopefully we'll see you soon and follow up, and we count on Fintech and Ibrahim. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.